Hey, buddy, I'm back again. More videos, more learning about our Constitution, kind of our design of government. I know early on we were talking a lot of history stuff, but we kind of have to, so we can understand the history of our government to figure out how we apply all this stuff today, right? Because all this stuff happened, 250 years ago, and we have to apply it to our current situation. So let's talk our Constitution Convention, the meeting in Philadelphia in 1787, where we make our document that is so important to us, okay? And so remember, last video, we mentioned Shays' Rebellion, right? Shays' Rebellion, the idea that, people were angry not getting paid. The government couldn't actually do its job, pay soldiers that had fought in the Revolutionary War. And people were like, maybe this whole being really, really democratic thing is not working out too well for us. And we got to find a stronger central government, okay? The biggest thing these guys that came together is that these, 55 delegates came from 12 of the 13 states. Rhode Island did not show up because they're Rhode Island, whatever, right? They're like, hey, let's revise the article. Let's fix it. Okay, let's get together. Let's do a little proofread, little revising session, and we'll fix the situations. As they start reading them, though, they're like, crap, this thing is garbage. We got to toss it out, and let's make a brand new document, essentially. The hard part about this is as we make this decision, it's like, is that actually legal? Are we actually overthrowing the government right now? Because it's kind of like killing a coup, you know what I mean? And so with that, number one, that's a big question. Like, okay, we just said to redo our entire government, number one. Number two, every state got one vote, but in the Articles of Confederation, our current accepted government, we needed all 13 to agree, not 9 of 13, as we'll decide the Constitution later on. Kind of a weird situation there. And this is all done in secret. Nobody said anything because, hey, it could be construed as trying to take over the government. So nothing got printed. Nothing was spoken to the public till a whole document was written. And so it's like, some legality was questioned here as we go through stuff, okay? Also the question hey, if only 9 of 13 states have to agree to it, is this really a government of the people, or is it governed by certain parts of the people? Kind of this idea of pluralist versus hyper-pluralist versus elitist in our forms of democracy we have. And so it's major problems going on here. So these 55 dudes meet in Philadelphia, okay? City of brotherly love, home of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and cheesesteaks, and they're there to revise these articles. Now, of the 55 dudes that show up there, okay, they're all rich white landowners. Okay, that's number one thing we're looking at about our whole idea of representing the United States, right? No women were there, no slaves, no Native Americans, no people of color, and that kind of stuff going on, okay? 3/4 of them had, political history in the government. They had served in the Continental Congress. 8 were signers of the Declaration. 21 fought in the war. And right away, they're like, okay, we got to find a person who's like the cooling, chilling force here, right? So they elect George Washington, right, Papa G-dubs, as being the president or the kind of the facilitator, the committee leader, if you will, of this whole thing. James Madison, all 5'5", 95 pounds of him, is considered the father of the Constitution because he's the guy who sat down and wrote down what every single person said. He wrote down every single little detail and eventually compiled it together to what is now the Constitution. He served as secretary. Some people were interesting there. Alexander Hamilton was known for his very, very annoying speeches. He was kind of like a whiny little dude, I guess, supposedly at the whole thing. The musical does not portray that part about him, to a degree. And you even have Benjamin Franklin there, who was the elder statesman, 81 years old. He had to be carried in a chair, and he was so weak and so sick he could not speak. So he had to write down what he wanted to say and have another person say it for him. So obviously, it's kind of an interesting situation we have going on here in Philadelphia. It was all kept secret, number one, because they want to make sure that, any proceedings from the opponents were kept secret, right? They don't want things getting out. They want to allow their very controversial viewpoints to come out because some of the things they were saying were super, super country at this time, right? Do we want to overthrow a government kind of situation? And so they kept all the doors, all the windows closed all summer long in Philadelphia when it's 100 degrees and 100% humidity. So there's also a time when people didn't shower, didn't bathe. This place had to be gross. All right, it had to be disgusting for the record. Okay, and so here are the 4 things these guys talk about when trying to make a new federal republic. Right, number one, limited government. So how can we make a stronger government that is still limited? How do we have a stronger central government that still protects citizens' rights? It's kind of that balance, right, between liberty and order. And we're trying to find that right balance. Under the AOC, we had too much liberty, not enough order. how do we find the butter zone right in between there? We have to have republicanism. How do the people vote for their leaders? And how do we vote for national leaders in election? We want the idea of separation of powers from Montesquieu, the idea of three branches defined powers to prevent that idea of tyranny and federalism. How do we balance states and the federal government? And this whole thing is going to come down to a whole bunch of compromises that we make happen here. So, number one, we're going to see how we're going to try and invent our Congress. The issue was big states, little states. Right? Some big states like Virginia, etc., little states like New Jersey were very worried about what they wanted, how things wanted to be. Virginia wanted a bicameral legislature, so two houses, right? Bi means two. And they wanted basically by population. So all the larger states have more representatives, all that kind of stuff, and then create a chief executive appointed by Congress, kind of like they do in Britain, where they have the prime minister. So we don't have a president, we have like a prime minister kind of thing. The New Jersey plan was like, all right, let's just give power to the Congress to tax. Every state gets one vote in a one house deal. And basically the articles there just kind of fix that tax problem. They wanted to move more revision kind of thing. Small states didn't like the Virginia plan because they're like, hey, this kind of screws us over, right? Because you have more population, you have more say. Big states didn't like the New Jersey plan because they're like, our power is screwed here. We're bigger states. We're more powerful. We're more people. So we should have more say if it's a true democracy kind of thing. And so we have the Great Compromise by Roger Sherman from Connecticut, who calls it the Connecticut Compromise because of that. So we're going to make our modern day system, right, with our bicameral House, our House and Senate. Every state gets two in the Senate, House being done by population. The idea of balancing those big and small states. So that's our number one compromise we have here to make this whole thing happen. It was a big victory for the small states. It was a victory for the large states. Everyone's going to be happy. Everyone's going to be equal. That's why today you have states like Montana and Wyoming that have two senators and one representative. But it kind of balances out the population kind of thing. Otherwise, those states would mean nothing when you think about it, right? In terms of if everything was done by population, all the biggest populated states like California and New York and Florida, et cetera, would have, all that say. God help Florida, man, having all that say, right? And so, that's where this compromise comes in this way. And so the other thing they brought in was the House of Representatives could only do tax bills. This is actually a pretty big issue that they bring in here because they want to make sure that the representatives that are closer to the people, the ones done by population, could do the money. So they wouldn't let the president or executive or the senators, who at the time were picked by the legislators, actually introduce any kind of tax bills whatsoever. That the tax bills were represented by the House because they were the closest ones to the people. So here we have our powers of Congress, right? And we kind of see where they go here. And we're kind of break down the powers of Congress we have. So this is in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, as they write this whole thing down. What can Congress actually do? So here we have things like they can lay and collect taxes, borrow money, establish bankruptcy laws, based on all this kind of stuff. But it says they can lay and collect taxes, but it doesn't say they can actually spend money. So essentially, if they can collect taxes and get money, they can spend it. So that's an implied power we have here. The idea that, just because, we can borrow it, get it, we can also spend it. We can also borrow money because, we can make money, so we can borrow money too. We have commerce, the idea we can regulate interstate commerce. This is between different states. So basically anything that goes between, any kind of state, they can take care of and regulate commerce that way. So like when it comes to discrimination, everything crosses state boundaries, hotels, that kind of thing, that plays a role in it. We have military and foreign powers where like the Congress can declare war, they can regulate, raise an army, pay for an army, regulate National Guard, all that kind of stuff. But they can also do a draft then. And so it's implied powers we have through this whole deal because they can make an army, they can do a draft. Other things they can do, like laws of naturalization. So if you're a citizen or not, they can do post offices, all those kind of things. But because they can establish laws of naturalization, they can also limit, immigrants, that kind of stuff coming in the country. So we'll see our express powers that are in Article 1, Section 8 of your Constitution. If you have me in regular government class, we talk about how important that section is. And I want you guys to look at that as we go through it. And then here we got, these implied powers that just because it's there, we can kind of do it. Okay, we kind of like take the extra part to it. The Three-Fifths Compromise is another big thing we had. Remember, slavery is a thing at this point, unfortunately, in history. And the southern states are like, hey, do we count slaves in our population? The northern states were like, no, they're not citizens, so they're not counted. But the southern states wanted more people. So the Three-Fifths Compromise was done to say that 3/5 of slave population would be counted towards representation in the House of Representatives. Basically, only did that just so that these states right down here, most of South Carolina, would not break away from the country and make their own kind of deal. So essentially, this compromise is only made to keep these states in the union at the time. They also compromised on the issue of could the government make slavery illegal? And Southerners essentially threatened to leave anytime slavery was discussion. South Carolina, if you ever take APUSH with me, we talk about South Carolina a lot. South Carolina was kind of the Florida man, if you will, of this time period. They're like, anytime slavery came up, they're like, oh, we're gone. They're leaving. We're taking our ball and going home back to South Carolina. If you touch slavery, we done. And so as part of that, their compromise was that we're not going to let any kind of, we're not going to, regulate slave trade or that kind of stuff at all until 1808. And so we were going to put it off for 20 years. Hopefully by then the whole situation is figured out and we'll fix everything. It was not fixed. And Madison, even though he was a Southerner and a slave owner too, he writes, as great as evil slavery is, a dismemberment of the Union would be worse. So it's like we're going to take this little hit just so we can keep the country together, essentially, in this compromise. The final draft, we're going to talk about things. The final draft had electoral college in it, how to filter the masses out for our vote. We'll talk about electoral college shortly in a second here. Our checks and balances, a president for 4 years. And they thought about putting a Bill of Rights in right away, but didn't do it. They didn't do it because most states already had their own Bill of Rights. They're like, yeah, it'll be fine. That's all good. It was not good enough, okay? And we'll kind of see where this whole thing comes in here later on. And so, Madison, being the one who broke most of the compromise, took most of the stuff together, he is considered kind of that father of the Constitution because he put those things together that way. And so we talked about already our 3/5 and our compromise with this one here, the 20-issue ban on slavery. Electoral college is a huge compromise for choosing the president because the states got to choose how electors could be chosen, but the electors still made the decision for president. So essentially, they didn't trust the people to make this vote, and it was this very kind of elite idea of government, right? The states would decide, okay, here's how we're going to pick our electors, based on people's vote, not people's vote, whatever it might be, and then put those votes in for president. And so the way they're kind of filtering out the uneducated people of America this time, the people who were not educated, were illiterate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and allowing the vote to those who would be the electors. And so electoral college is kind of interesting compromises put that way because people just didn't trust the regular people, if you will. It's kind of that elite model of government that, some people say we still have in power today. And so we've argued we should maybe change and amend out. So the policy things, right? So we laws that the government and how they're carried out is another big issue that we have here with this. Congress passes the laws, the executive branch executes them and carries them out. So how do they actually do that? It's not really explained very well in there. Later, we're going to have the presidents do executive orders. They're going to create agencies to help build and shape our policy, which we'll get into later on. And so we're kind of help to design these systems. When we read the Constitution, we're going to notice that things are written out very, very, very generally, except for the Congress part, right? The executive and judicial are very, very general in how they do it. And, they kind of form this over time. They didn't really think those two parts out super well. And we're going to see those develop over time instead as we kind of go to this. So we also got to figure out how we have federalism here to balance our state and government powers. We'll get into federalism in more detail shortly. But we do have that supremacy clause in the Constitution, the very end of the document, where it says, okay, supremacy clause establishes our Constitution that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, not the state. So when the states and the federal government come into question, federal government law has to be followed every single time. And it's kind of that way that state laws cannot be contradicting national laws, even though they still do quite often, believe it or not. Here's our 7 articles we have to break down here. Our legislative branch, Article 1, executive Article 2, judicial Article 3, Article 4 is relation among the states. Article 5 is amendment process. Article 6 are supremacy clause. Article 7, how we ratify and put our country together. Main parts I want you to highlight in your constitutions. If you don't have it out yet, make sure you grab that from me, okay? Article 1, Section 8. You find that and take a look at it here. The main powers of Congress are all listed here. This is what I consider to be the most important part of the Constitution, that government can tax, that can borrow money, raise an army, all the things that they can do in those enumerated or listed powers for the government. The Commerce Clause is used for all kinds of laws because they can regulate commerce among the several states, which means that anything that crosses the state line, don't forget, the federal government can regulate. So think about modern day stuff like healthcare, insurance, power, electricity, transportation, like airways and railways, and all that kind of stuff. That's how Congress gets to regulate. That is because they can regulate trade between the states. The necessary and proper clause is the very end of Article 1, Section 8, where it says Congress shall have power to make all laws shall be necessary and proper for carrying out into execution our foregoing powers. Called the elastic clause. It basically grants these like flexibility for legislating powers. That if something comes up that's not in those other areas, but is close to it, the government can do it. And so if we need to get something done for the government, they can actually make that happen in Article 1, Section 8. The full faith and credit clause is also really important, Article 4. You want to highlight this or kind of put a little star next to this in your Constitution for me, in that it kind of tells how the states got to get together, okay? Essentially, it says the states have to open up their laws. They have to encourage respect each other's laws. If a law is okay in one state, they have to respect it in other states. That's got to be okay. Right now, I think that's probably about marijuana is one of the big things here right now with this topic. That some states have legal marijuana, some states don't. Like Illinois, you can go across the border, dispensaries, all kind of stuff, but you can't bring it back into Wisconsin. So we have to respect those ideas in other states that way. Gay marriage used to be a big topic in this one, in that some states allowed same-sex marriages and some states didn't, and that kind of part to it. But that's where the full faith and credit law comes in. Clause comes in where it says that every state, for the public acts, records, judicial proceedings of every other state. So basically, if you get married in one state, you have to recognize another state. If you get divorced in one state, you recognize it in the other states, all that kind of stuff. You have privileges and immunities, so that you have certain privileges. Like if I can drive in one state, I can drive in another state. And that's okay to do. That's where that privilege idea comes in. So other things aren't done that way. Things like hunting, that kind of stuff, aren't necessarily covered that way. But if you're a hunter and you have your hunter safety, you can have like the reciprocity between different states back and forth. So like, there's different ways they can make it happen to represent the different kind of stuff. Every state has different requirements for things, but there are some things they can work with to show different privileges. Driving is my best example where, I have a license, I can go drive in another state. As long as I have a license from one state, I can drive there for a certain amount of time until I make my legal residence there. They want a Republican form of government, which is like the idea of that everyone has representative government, has an executive, has a Congress or a Congress-like thing. An extradition that if you commit a crime in one place, you're tried in the state that you committed your crime in. So states have to like send criminals back when they catch them on a warrant from another state. Supremacy clause, we talked about Article 6 already a little bit, which is saying that you have to have the law of the land is a huge big deal here, and that the Constitution is supreme law of the land. When things don't agree, you make sure you check them off. There are some people that actually refuse to sign the Constitution. Some people just left right away because either they missed their wife and kids or they just didn't agree with it. So like George Mason, Edmund Randolph, Albert Gerry, three of the kind of biggest guys at the Constitution Convention didn't sign it because they didn't agree with it. They didn't like it. By December of 1787, they put it out to the states to ratify. They need 9 of 13 states to ratify it. Right off the bat, Delaware was the first one because they want to be the first one to do it, right? That kind of stuff. They get 3 by then, and then they get 2 more in just January 1788. And if you look at the chart on page 25 of your textbook, you'll see when every state does it, the 10th state being, I believe, Virginia it is, and New York being the 11th. And New York was the biggest state where the debate was, where their biggest kind of almost torn on it. And when we get a ratification discussion with Federalists and Anti-Federalists, New York is kind of the center of that debate. The big debate they also had was that idea of Bill of Rights. And remember that we said earlier that the writers thought that they didn't need a Bill of Rights because, well, the rights are in there. And so they thought that here are the rights in the original Constitution, things like no religious test to hold federal office. They wouldn't say, okay, you had to be a certain religion to be in office. The right to jury trial, they thought was clear in there already. That Congress or states can pass Bill of Attainder. These different things were in there, ex post facto laws that you can't charge somebody with a law after it was made. So like, let's say they make vaping illegal and you vaped last week, they can't arrest you for that kind of thing. They cannot suspend habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is that they have to tell you why they're arresting you, essentially why they're holding you in prison without charging you. And that's allowed except in wartime. So that's what they thought were enough of the rights to be present there. A lot of people didn't like it. We talk about representative republic, our collection of sovereign states gather national interests together. And so we look at the time we had popular sovereignty, or like basically election of the people for only the House of Representatives. Remember, the Senate was picked by state legislators until 1913. And so the only national politicians or national leaders that the people actually picked were the House of Representatives. And then even as until 1913, then they can start picking the Senate. Even still today, technically the President of the United States is picked by Electoral College when the states name their electors. And so really, are we that representative? It's kind of the big question we talk about here. Meh. That's what we'll debate later on, I think. Separation of powers, obviously, is a big topic we see in our Constitution here. How each branch has their own powers, right? Legislative branch being lawmaking, executive being the enforcing, judicial branch being the interpreting of the whole laws. We'll get more involved in that later on in the year. Our checks and balances, of course, always kind of a big thing to look at and talk about. We talk about this in regular government a lot, but how does each branch kind of limit the other branch? And it's based in there to make sure that no one branch becomes too powerful. It's kind of based on this rule of law that nobody is above the law. No president, no representative, no judge. And they can be arrested. They can be charged. We've seen impeachments happen, all that kind of stuff because of our process here. And so the president can check that Congress and judicial. The Congress can check the president and judicial. And the judicial can check the Congress and the president and make sure that they're not getting too powerful, kind of taking over. And so we can kind of see different things that are placed here where they can declare certain things with, and we'll talk more about this when we get to look at our Constitution a little deeper here. But obviously we see the legislative branch has things to like approve appointments, that kind of stuff. Executive branch can check the courts by putting all the judges and the justices on the bench. Legislative branch checks judicial by confirming all those nominations. They have to go through and make sure that all those nominations are good. They can also impeach judges and kick them out of office. The judicial branch can declare our laws and our presidential acts unconstitutional. We have the veto legislation, and of course, legislature can also overrule that veto from the president. Veto is that big thing we talk about, and that's the last thing we do in government class, how big the veto is, and and the idea of how you can veto a law that you feel is is not going to help the people. And a lot of times party plays a big role in that, kind of a funny cartoon from 2014 of Mitch McConnell, yes, turtle guy, saying, I'm going to pass all these laws. And there's Obama, the Democrat, being like, hey, I got the veto stamp. Ha, ha, ha. And so that's kind of where we see a lot with the biggest, most public version of checks and balances is there, making sure that, it's what everyone sees going for the country. The other thing is called a pocket veto, though. When people talk about pocket vetoes very often, is that it says that in the Constitution that if a president who gets a bill at the end of a session, does not sign it, it's a pocket veto and kills the bill. And it's actually a way that they don't have to formally say no to a law, but they just kind of like informally like push it aside. It kind of disappears. That way they can't get accused of saying no, and they can't go back for an override vote of 2/3. And it's kind of funny how those pocket vetoes work that way. Senate is also supposed to advise the president, right? And so the Senate's job is to actually like advise the president and say, hey, we think it's a good person or a bad person to be in part of your administration. You should or should not use these people, that kind of thing is kind of where that comes in that way. And so, those are some ideas that kind of definitely come into this whole idea of advice and consent and how things work. We talked about impeachment a lot in 2020. In 2021. So just kind of remember how impeachment works. So we kind of saw this go through recently that an accusation of wrongdoing is done by the House of Representatives. So the House of Representatives can do the accusing of the president, right? When they impeach a president, it's an accusation that they did something wrong. The Senate is the trial of the accused. Now, it's recently popped up that for the second impeachment of President Trump, Chief Justice John Roberts will not preside over it. And so if a sitting president is being impeached, the Chief Justice is the presiding officer to make sure there's no unfair thing. If the vice president was presiding over the Senate, well, there's a big advantage for the vice president for that president to be convicted because then they become president. And so a lot of times, we have that case that way. We actually have 3 presidents who've been impeached now, Johnson, Clinton, and Trump. None have been convicted, but we'll see what happens now with the second impeachment of President Trump, because who knows? President Trump is being impeached after his conviction trial is happening after he leaves office for the accusation of inciting insurrection. Who knows? They may find him guilty, which should lead to some situations later on. We'll talk about that when we get to that deeper in the Constitution. For the judicial branch, they have judicial review, which is something that was not actually written out in the Constitution, but later on established in Marbury v. Madison, something we're going to talk about when we get to that part, when we get to that section of our class, and how they actually decide in a court case that, this is they kind of interpret their own job out, if you will, and decide how they can deem an act of legislature and an act of the president unconstitutional. They have to explain why they do it. It has to be a majority of the court. So that's where it kind of comes, this judicial review idea comes in. And obviously we have federalism too. So federalism is a balance of power, and we ensure that the federal government is too powerful, the states aren't too powerful. Kind of this very delicate balancing act we see throughout the entire document. We see a balancing act of the 3 branches. We see a balancing act between the states and the federal government. And it's kind of this way we can balance the idea of liberty and order and try to keep everybody happy. it's really hard to make laws because they actually made it a gridlock by design. They want to make it slow. They want to make it deliberate. They want to make it so that you had to debate it, rewrite it, go through it multiple times before things actually worked. With the bicameral House, you have an extra step. You have to make sure that the exact same bill is passed by both the Senate and the House. So there's more steps than you can think about in reality. You have the whole process going through committee and all that kind of stuff as well, as you guys maybe saw in government class. We have veto power by the president to kind of like limit the hasty actions and kind of knee-jerk reactions. We have the Bill of Rights that says you can't make laws that violate people's rights. We have the due process that all procedure has to be followed for every single one. We can't skip levels of this and be like, oh, we're going to skip this and go right to something else instead. And we had certain things that you cannot make laws about. And in Article 1, Section 9 and Section 10, it kind of talks about what kind of things we can't make laws about, what are things the states can't make laws about, or things that the federal government cannot make laws about either. So for the Supreme Court to overrule one of those ideas, they have the majority opinion, 5 and 9, at least 5 and 9, deciding what's going to happen with stuff. And they can always kind of give their opinion as to why they overturned something or why they chose not to overturn something. I was a little disjointed, guys, but kind of an overview. We're going to kind of discuss this in class of our Constitution and kind of what kind of things are in it. And we'll kind of get more involved in our Constitution and the important parts of it in class when I see you guys next. So thank you for your time and your consideration and paying attention to this long, probably more disjointed than I want to be lecture. So thank you all very much, everybody.